morning, everyone. I feel so weird up here without a podium or anything like that, so please excuse me if I feel sort of strange. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk with you this morning about some of the things that are not only going on at the university, but also how this idea of symmetry might be a very interesting way to think about education and digital humanities and creativity, and we'll get into a lot of those conversations today, okay? So first of all, as you already know, let's go back here. Go back. There we go. Okay, who am I? So, as you already know, I've been at the university for about 7 years now. I came from University of Central Missouri, where I taught for 14 years while doing my PhD program at the University of Missouri-Columbia, about maybe 90 miles away or so. And then I spent 2 years teaching high school in Phoenix for a couple of years after I got out of the military, which I was in the Air Force for 10 years prior to that. So, yeah, traveled around just a little bit, but I'm a reluctant educator entering into that market after I spent those 10 years in the Air Force. My mom was an educator, her sister was an educator, their cousins were I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. And then all of a sudden I got out of the service and I became a teacher. So, when I thought about what I wanted to do with my career in teaching, I found that in teaching high schoolers, that the traditional methods didn't necessarily always work the best. And so I tried to incorporate a lot of creativity into those English classes. At that time, they were called language arts classes. And the creativity involved getting the students as much involved in doing things that would be real world oriented. So we produced a newspaper, and we did all kinds of college training for students that were at risk, that no one ever thought they would have an opportunity to go to college or even think about it. We took field trips to some community colleges in the area. So I knew that there were different ways to reach that generation of students, and I still believe that. And I believe that symmetry beyond that goes hand in hand with being creative and then engaging students is where we are with regards to education right now, because we really have to meet students in different places, I believe. Be like Josh and pointing anywhere, right? So, all right, so just a show of hands, how many of you have heard of digital humanities before? Okay, a couple of people. And how many of you have heard of digital Africana studies? All right, a few, not very many. What about anything regarding Africana studies? What would you, if you had to think about, and I won't ask anybody, but if you had to think about what Africana studies means, think about some of those things that conjure up in your mind. And I'm going to maybe clarify some of those, but perhaps also even change some of those preconceived notions that you have about that particular discipline. First of all, Africana Studies is the study of the entire African diaspora, where we study South America, Africa, the Caribbean, as well as North America, and the interactions between all those individuals with Europeans, both here in America as well as on the continent of Europe. So when we think about Africana Studies, we always try to encourage students, particularly in this day and age, with ideas related or issues related to race just at the forefront of everyone's mind, that particular major goes hand in hand with just about any other major in the world. And so we encourage students to not only take our classes, but also have those difficult to have conversations in the classroom, which I think students need at this point. Digital humanities is something that I've been in, since about the late 90s or so, before the term actually came into being around 2003, 2004. And we'll talk about that story here in just a few moments. But what digital humanities is that where we in the humanities tend to use a number of computational tools, digital technologies, in order to perform our research differently. When you have access to digital tools, new questions emerge regarding your research, and you can see things differently. You can engage with your research differently, and you're able to interact with it very, very differently. And we also encourage our students to use digital tools to express their understanding of whatever that course content happens to be. So it brings the classroom to life in very different ways, and we're really excited about the number of new tools that continue to come out that we can then creatively imagine how they can be used in the classroom particularly when they're focused on a single discipline or related disciplines. And you'll see some examples of that here in just a moment. Digital Africana Studies is an example of that, where we're studying Africana Studies, but we're using a number of digital tools to help us experience Africana Studies very differently, and to help students express their understanding of whatever that course content happens to be very, very differently. And once again, you'll see some examples of that here in just a moment. So what we try to do in Africana Studies is the field is changing. When Africana Studies or Black Studies was first introduced at the college level, gosh, at the early part of the 70s, when students were protesting in San Francisco, and because there weren't any classes dealing with Black Studies just after the Civil Rights Movement, this is where all these ethnic studies programs really were introduced at the higher education level. And so, usually those classes had been situated around slavery, around race, and around issues that were very pertinent at the time, and they're still very pertinent at the time now. But what Africana Studies has done, it has evolved to not only include the entire diaspora, but to include other relevant topics of interest to students that incorporate those very difficult to have topics. So when we're talking about race, we might do it through a hip-hop course, or when we're talking about class, we might do it through a digital Africana Studies course that may focus on other aspects of the diaspora, but we're really helping students visualize and experience issues related to class. One of the courses that I teach is one of my areas of specialization is the Harlem Renaissance. And as I was studying the Harlem Renaissance as part of my dissertation back in the, late 90s, I guess that was. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? Back in the late 90s, I found that I couldn't study or could barely understand the Harlem Renaissance without also talking about things that were happening in France at that same period. When you think about how the Harlem Renaissance began, yes, we know it was just after World War I, but we know that Renaissance here in America, which wasn't just in Harlem, it was in New York, it was in Chicago, it was in Philadelphia, Kansas City, St. Louis. We couldn't understand that unless we were also thinking about the things that inspired the Harlem Renaissance, or the genesis of that, which was really during World War I, when Black troops were first able to fight under the French flag because of our American racial issues in the American military, the U.S. military. And so being loaned to the French was quite an interesting experience for many of those Black troops. Many of them, however, were also members of the regimental band, and when they weren't fighting, they were introducing this brand new form of music called jazz to the French citizens. And the French ate it up. And they not only did they love it, but they were trying to inspect instruments to figure out, is there a hidden valve somewhere? How does that trombone make that noise? Or how does that trumpet talk to me like that? And so after the war, many of those troops decided that they would just stay in France, because not only of that very warm reception that many of the French were giving them, but also because the antithesis of that was basically what was going on here in America. And we can imagine that with lynchings on the rise, with segregation, the de facto status of the relationship between blacks and whites here in America, with violence, and then later on in the early 20s, prohibition and organized crime and all those kinds of things that were happening here in America. France was really attractive to Black folks, especially Black folks that were artists, that were creatives, that were entertainers, that were business folks, that were able to make their way over there. The reception they received was absolutely amazing. And so when I started studying that, many other things came out of that field of study, and that connection between the Harlem Renaissance and Montmartre, which is in the 18th arrondissement in Paris. There we go. Okay. So during my dissertation program, I was able to propose a project dealing with a brand new technology at the time called virtual reality. And at that time, 1997 or so, 96, only 2 faculty members on the entire University of Missouri campus submitted a proposal. Virtual Harlem was one of those picked up, and as a PhD student, it didn't necessarily receive as much funding, but it did take off because it got so much more attention. Virtual Harlem was inspired by when I was teaching African American literature classes, and I wanted my students during the section of the Harlem Renaissance to connect with that literature and love it as much as I did because I was studying that period. I wanted them to not only be excited about it, but to engage with it and to be able to experience it in some very interesting ways. The birth of the Harlem Renaissance, or the Virtual Harlem Project, came out of that. And I'll tell you a little bit about that while this video is playing. Oops. There we go. And I'm going to adjust some of my audio here in just a minute. So what you're seeing, I'll just move out of the way here. What you're seeing is an interface that we were using to build parts of Virtual Harlem. This is the inside of one of the versions of the Cotton Club. And we see where students were when given the tools, they were able to actually not only move furniture around based on historic photos, but also be able to engage in the material because they had to do the research in order to figure out not only what the Cotton Club looked like, but also what furniture looked like and what objects in that establishment looked like and what events happened there. And then we could have that difficult conversation. Well, what was the Cotton Club? Well, it was a club that was segregated in the middle of Harlem where blacks basically couldn't go in unless they were patrons or waiters unless they were waiters or waitresses or entertainers. So this whole idea of Harlem becoming a service environment really then starts to come to the surface. And so the notions of what the Harlem Renaissance was or is to those students began to sort of modify and evolve as we had these conversations. Why didn't they let blacks in? Who was the owner of that place? And what kind of things went on there? And who were the entertainers? And how did they feel about not being able to come in as patrons? And who was allowed in as a patron if you were not a white American? So all those questions came about, and the students were actually able to do some really cool things. Within this environment has evolved over a number of years. How many of you remember an old environment called Second Life? Yeah, that was a long time ago, right? I'm dating myself. Well, Virtual Harlem was in Second Life, and it was one of the largest representations of African American life and culture that were there. We had 4 islands at the time, and 2 of them were Virtual Harlem, and 2 of them were Virtual Montmartre, connected by a bridge. And students could meet me there in Virtual Harlem. I didn't care where they were physically, and we held class in this particular space. It was an amazing experience, and it modified the way that students not only experienced the content, but also how they engaged in that content. They were able to create things. They were able to do demonstrations and presentations. Do personifications. They could take on any persona they wanted to, as long as they were able to accurately portray that particular historic individual. They had collaborations with students over in France at the time. I was a visiting professor at the Sorbonne, and they were able to collaborate and meet in that space. It was an amazing experience for all those students that some still write to me about. And here is the newer version of this, and I'll just go ahead and start playing that. You saw that bit.ly link, and I'll send that to you if anyone is interested in it. But what you can do is, if you have one of the low-cost VR headsets, you can actually go to that link from your phone and turn your phone on its side and put it into VR mode, and you can be immersed in this version of Virtual Harlem. This is a 2018 version. We're doing a collaboration with my university, the Center for Digital Humanities, which I'll talk about in just a moment. We're doing a collaboration with a research center in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and they funded the further development of Virtual Harlem so that they would have a virtual exhibit. And so this is that version that we delivered to them with some things not there with regards to the avatars and cars moving and things like that. But I thought you might want to see that and learn how you could immerse yourself within this particular environment. It's a lot of fun to actually feel immersed and engage in a space that maybe you've not visited in real life before. Now, one of the things that we're also doing to engage students with material is to bring out the creative side in them. And in my classes, I always have a number of students who are artists, who are dancers, or who are some other form of entertainers. And so, being the technology nerd that I am, I always try to get students involved in a variety of ways that not only can they enhance virtual Harlem, but also that they might further their careers in ways that they may not necessarily have expected. This particular dancer, very talented, whom you'll see in just a moment, is one that we decided that he would be perfect to put into a motion capture suit. And so this mocap example is where we not only captured him dancing, but we also encouraged him to consider maybe learning the jitterbug and the Charleston and some of those historic dances, so that we could then take the recording of his dance and apply that to a number of avatars. And you'll see how accurate the mocap suit is that we have at the Center for Digital Humanities, which was very, very cool. We've got a 2-person mocap suit, and we're doing a number of projects with faculty members that will take advantage of this. There's a Hangzhou project in China, and then, of course, being able to further enhance virtual Harlem, which is going to be a lot of fun. Then another colleague of mine is doing something on the evolution of various dances, which began in Africa, and how they've evolved to become the contemporary dances that we know today. So, for instance, twerking, and all the ways that dance has evolved over periods of time. And you can see how accurate that is, and this kid was amazing. And so we're very excited about having not only access to this technology, but also how we're able to introduce this technology to any other faculty members who are interested in incorporating this sort of thing into their research and later on into their courses. Now, the digital production that you see here is all, I think, very important to once again understand how we're engaging students. These are students that we're preparing for a course project, and I thought it would be really cool if we put them in front of a green screen and had them portray actors and insert themselves into virtual Harlem in various ways, or into Paris. So students would be able to see that, hey, I can actually do something like this. So teaching them the basics of all of this kind of production work really does change not only how they get into the course content, but how they have to do the research in order to make whatever their project is that much more accurate and get a good grade from me. And then the Global Africana Studies experience is another way, once again, that we are able to engage students. This is a course that I designed here about 6 years ago or so, that is that extension of my research in the Harlem Renaissance. As I mentioned, you can't understand the Harlem Renaissance without also understanding things that were happening in Paris at the same time. And so over, well, it used to be Thanksgiving break, but now over spring break every year, I take a group of students to Paris with me to experience the course content related to a class called When African Americans Came to Paris, where we study the black expatriate presence in Paris from the turn of the 20th century until very, very near the present. And when you start to think about it, you start to think about people like, Miles Davis and James Baldwin and Richard Wright and all these very famous individuals, but it started happening way before that, like Josephine Baker and Jean Boulard and Ada Bricktop Smith, that many of the students had never heard of before. And when we go to Paris, we actually experience a lot of that, those locations where those individuals may have lived, worked, or played, and the students have an amazing time. But in addition to that, we also have them doing some creative things. So they're able to create 360 digital storytelling demonstrations of their experiences. They create a group documentary that we're putting together that we're going to see in the Flandreau Dome, filmed in 360. They do a lot of other things regarding social media and live broadcasting in 360. So we have a great time over there, and the students actually do get a chance to then apply the things that they've learned technologically to help others understand the documentation of their experience. It's a great time. There's just some more pictures of them on our river cruise. We do walking tours of Black Paris. Our tour guide there is an expert of that particular genre. And then I'll show you a part of a video clip that one of the students put together.
The architecture. Look, there's gold on the fence. Like, the details, man. It's gorgeous.
And these are students that
It's
would
so beautiful.
traditionally not consider
Like,
going overseas. And we've
not
had increased
realistic.
enrollment in this
Like,
kind of
see how
experience
big
over
it
the
is,
years,
and you just
starting with
imagine how
7.
must have took
This
them,
spring
like,
break, I'm
make
taking
this.
26 students with me. It's going to be an amazing experience.
It's really good.
Like, I don't know what to say.
Absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just taking it all in.
It feels like we're on the set of a movie.
What are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about the garden. Last time I didn't get to see them, so.
I got to tell you about this place. This is France's or Paris's homage to the hip-hop community. And they've built an entire location just above the Châtelet metro station that is a whole hip-hop location called La Place. And so there are classes here, there are dance studios, performance spaces, there's a WeWork area for small businesses, and they're sponsoring the largest dance competition in the world this year while we're there, a hip-hop dance competition. So the students are really excited about that. And then finally, we thought it was important to get students involved in real-world activities. So I think 2 years ago, I had a colleague of mine that was doing an art exhibit on a very famous artist of the 1950s named Buford Delaney. And she said, how do you think we can bring this art exhibit to life? And I said, well, I have some ideas for you. And a number of my students were working on augmented reality projects in our class, and they were able to find funding for these 6 or 7 students that went with me. They paid for everything, and we were able to then go to this art exhibit opening, augment the exhibit, and then show others that were there how that actually worked. And so let me show you some of the students' experiences and the production that they got into.
I think that the fantastic thing about the Africana studies is that it teaches you that the world is a lot bigger than you can really consider.
Don't you worry there, my honey, we might not
So I'll just talk through this a little bit. We were able to, of course, take a green screen with us, and our job was basically to bring these pieces of art to life. And so we were using an augmented reality application called Blipper, which allowed us to augment these pieces. So when you scanned a work of art, you would see this additional information on your mobile device. So we filmed a spoken word artist. We filmed the person who was curating a number of these works, and then we were able to insert them onto the various representative works of art. And the students stayed up, several nights late working on this and putting it all together, testing it just before the event happened, and then, of course, making any modifications that we needed to make. And, of course, then the opening night, where this sort of artist community that lived around this location, which is called Reed Hall, owned by Columbia University. They were able to come out, and the students had an amazing time. Just getting them involved in that kind of real-world activity engaged them enough to where many of them decided to not only become Africana Studies majors, but they wanted to continue those kinds of digital projects as a part of what they were doing. One even wrote me and said that he augmented his essay and sent his professor instructions on how to get additional information when that person scanned pages of the essay, and they could see video clips of the student on the phone explaining what that portion of the essay was all about. So they're taking these skills and applying them outside of the classroom, and I would imagine even after they've graduated from the university. So it's that kind of relationship between the creative and the digital and the focus on content is really quite important to us.
Bryan Carter.
They like to have a good time with those. Okay, and so when you think about all of this that we're doing, this is all all examples of digital humanities and digital Africana studies. This is where we really want to engage students, and as a result of that rise in the interest in digital humanities, the university has made a huge investment, not only in digital humanities types of projects, but they've created last summer the Center for Digital Humanities, which I'm now the director of. And so that Center for Digital Humanities basically assists faculty members in doing these same kinds of things, focusing first on their research, and then that may translate into various pedagogical or methodological aspects that they can incorporate into the classroom. So the Center for Digital Humanities is one that, in addition to being able to work with faculty members, we're also doing various forms of outreach. We have a lot of really cool equipment. We just purchased a fantastic high-resolution 3D scanner. It gets down to like 0.02 microns or something like that. And we're scanning cultural heritage items, not only in our Museum of Art, but also with other partners. There's a research center in Fort Lauderdale, Florida that I told you about. They've got a vast collection of African art that's in their archives, and you have to go through all of this headache to just access it. You can't touch any of these items unless you have gloves on, but imagine being able to rotate it virtually and get very close and see details, and then have that curated. So those kinds of projects are ones that we're working on now, and it's going to be fantastic. I'm going to move this mic over here so I can see if I can navigate the site. Let's see how this works. Here we go. Uh-oh. Let's see. Back to here. Back to that window. Thank you. There we go. Okay. And let's click on that link there. And it's just, if you want to just navigate there, just digitalhumanities@arizona.edu. Thank you. And so I encourage you to check out this website, but basically what you're going to see is the site that's ever evolving for the Center for Digital Humanities, and it's one that we're working with a number of faculty projects. Now, when establishing this center, and as I mentioned before, what Digital Humanities is and how we're extending that to faculty members, not only in the College of Humanities, but also outside of the college, we wanted to make sure that that faculty members had different types of resources that would allow them to create their digital humanities projects. Now, when I designed this model, I went around and looked at other ways that digital humanities centers are supporting their faculty members. And what I found is that most are giving cash awards, and then that faculty has to then go out and find a coder, a modeler, some sort of creative designer that would then create that project and deliver a final product back. And that's fine for some if you have those kinds of resources, but many of our faculty members just didn't have those kinds of connections. And I found many colleagues, in fact, I've gone through that myself, where I'm looking for a 3D modeler, and it takes forever just to find someone who can model what I'm looking for. The Center for Digital Humanities takes a lot of that out of the picture. And what we did was, instead of awarding cash grants, we award blocks of developmental time. We're working with an organization on campus where undergraduate and graduate coders and developers are getting real-world experience, and so they're the ones that are working on these faculty projects that are allocated blocks of developmental time. And so those faculty projects range all over the place. You can scroll down and you can see a lot of them. Motion capture, we're doing 360, we're doing virtual reality, but we're also doing more traditional things like database and text analysis and augmented reality. And so the variety of faculty projects is just immense, and we're just doing our next call for proposals here that are due on the 15th, and so we're really excited about getting more faculty involved. Now, to complete that whole circle, different than any other center, in addition to the developmental blocks of time, those faculty are meeting with those developers so they can ramp up their DH skills and learn how their own projects are being developed. They can write about, speak about, and propose about them much more effectively. They are also getting some assistance with grant writing, and they're also getting opportunities where they can publish their work for tenure and promotion, which of course we have to deal with over at the university if you're on the tenure track. So when you think about that whole sort of closed loop that faculty can take advantage of, it really does give them inspiration now to get involved more so with digital humanities, so they can engage our students differently, so they can find new research questions and perhaps even take their own research in vastly different directions. So we're so excited about that, and so thankful that the university and the college have given us these opportunities, and we're definitely looking to make community partnerships. So that's what we're doing at the university. That's what we're doing with Digital Africana Studies, Digital Humanities, and if you'd like to learn more, please just contact me, let me know, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about other projects that we're working on. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
For one really good question.
Yes, we do. Yes, we're working with, actually we have a really nice National Science Foundation grant that is connected to the Smart Cities Initiative in Harlem, New York. So the Optical Sciences program at our university has received this grant where they pulled us in, and they're creating these things called zero clients, where 100 apartment buildings in New York that don't currently have internet access or where it's very expensive are getting these zero client machines in the apartment that are connected to servers in the location. And so we're giving them high-speed access where they don't have to worry about security or installations, but they can still do things like gaming and productivity tools and things like that. And then the Center for Digital Humanities is providing creative content that will be experienced over those high-speed networks. So we're really excited about that. We're working with the museums, the research centers, and another museum in Philadelphia called the Colored Girls Museum, and we're going to be scanning some of the virtual or some of the objects there to create a virtual tour. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.